Every year I pick a room in my house that needs an upgrade, and so far I've done my bathroom, and then last year my living room. This year I decided it's time to update the kitchen and save it from those orange toned cabinets. Now I have a lot packed into this kitchen makeover, so I'm splitting it up into a few different episodes. Today I'm focusing on a DIY Limewash wall and creating a little breakfast bar area since we currently don't have a space to eat in the kitchen. First, I need to clear the area and remove anything that doesn't need to stay for the immediate future. After watching the Sorry Girls, I decided I wanted to try and make my own Limewash paint rather than buying it, but first we need to start with a clean blank canvas on the wall, and I'm using this Zinsser 123 primer. The floors are getting redone and the baseboards painted as well, so I didn't worry about dripping paint or getting any on the baseboards, but if you're concerned about that, make sure you put drop cloth down and tape off anywhere you don't want to get paint. I'm going to warn you now, a lot of what I did in this kitchen makeover was trial and error process for me. I did everything 100% on my own and made plenty of mistakes along the way. Just as I like to share my mistakes in my home decor videos, I will share my mistakes in this makeover series as well. So to make the Limewash paint yourself, you're going to need hydrated lime. My hardware store had Mason's lime and this worked just fine. Alum salt, natural pigment, a bucket to mix everything, and a block brush to paint it on. I actually recommend 3 buckets because there are 2 different mixtures you will need plus a lime putty. I was also incredibly impatient as usual at first and didn't want to wait for my pigment to come in the mail, so I thought makeup has pigment in it, right? Why not use a bronzer in the color I want? That's a terrible idea, don't try it. You'll need to make a lime putty first by adding some water into a bucket and then add the hydrated lime a little bit at a time and mix it until you have a cream cheese-like consistency. You're going to need more lime than you think. This putty can last a long time if you add a layer of water on top of it and seal it up with a lid. They actually say it gets better with age. Now we can make the Limewash. We need 2 separate recipes here. One will be a primer coat, which is thinner, and one will be the wash coat, which adds all of that texture. You will need a measurement, anything you choose that will be equal to 1 part. At first I used this little cup that made way too much, and I ended up throwing out this first batch anyways, but for the primer coat you need 10 parts of that lime putty added to a clean bucket. Then you want to add 40 parts of water to the putty and mix it up. Next you want to add 1 part of alum salt, but you want to dissolve the salt in some water first. So I stuck it in the microwave and then poured it into my bucket. And last you need 1 part pigment. That first bucket was the bronzer, so ignore that one. Here's the correct pigment you want to use. I ordered this from Amazon and will link it in my description box below. Now you want to mix everything together. Like I said, you'll need 2 recipes here. They're almost identical with the exception of how much water you add. The second bucket will contain 20 parts of water rather than 40 for the wash coat. Here you can see the wash coat is slightly thicker and darker than the primer coat. Now you want to use the block brush to apply the Limewash. I'm using a 5-inch stain brush, and you want to keep stirring the mixture because the lime will start to settle. You only want to dip about 1 inch or so of the brush bristles into the bucket. You don't want the brush to be dripping, and then apply it to the wall. When applying the Limewash, you don't want to paint how you typically paint a wall. You want to go in long cross-hatch motions and do sections at a time. In all honesty, I did this wall 3 separate times before I was happy with how it turned out. And when doing research, they say to make clouds in different areas of the wall and then connect the clouds together. So I did that method at first, and I did not like the results. The wall looked so busy and not what I was going for. So I did it again. And this time I did floor to ceiling sections of the wall. Well, then it looked like stripes, which also wasn't what I wanted. You can see the lines of each row. All right, you guys, as always, I learned a few things while doing the DIY Limewash wall. So first thing, they tell you to use natural pigments for a reason. Definitely don't be impatient like I was because you're just gonna have to re-prime your wall, re-lime wash it. So use those natural pigments from the beginning. What I found was that by trying to use like pigments that I had, other types of colorants that I already had on hand or could find easily in the stores, it left a really powdery finish on my walls. And that can happen for two reasons. Either my ratios were off whenever I was mixing up the recipe, or I didn't have enough water in there, or it could have been those pigments that I didn't have the right consistency for this recipe that you need. Second thing, while it does take a little while for the Limewash paint to dry, you do want to get it on the walls relatively quickly. I found that out because if you don't, like, I know you want to have this variation in tone. You want to have some light areas, some dark areas, and that's what gives it that Limewash beautiful accent wall effect that we're going for. But what I realized is if you go too slowly and you kind of let an area dry and come back, you're not really gonna get that right look that you're going for with it layering like you see it now. So I also found out that if you don't like the pattern and how it looks, add another coat of the Limewash. You can add as many coats of the wash coat as you want after the first primer coat, and each layer that you add is going to completely change the design and the look on your wall. So play around with it. If you don't like it, add another coat. If you love it, leave it alone, let it go. And on those same lines, don't go in a straight line like I had done with my primer coat, because you will see that on your final result. I know in a lot of videos they tell you to make clouds and then connect the clouds. I tried that the very first time, and it could have been the recipe that I used, because we all know that was a dud and I shouldn't have tried to add my own type of pigments. But I just didn't like the way that that looked. It was too literally patchy and not this nice cohesive flow of the texture that I have on there now. So this is after one primer coat and one wash coat. And you can see there are still some areas where you can see that white wall underneath. I am gonna go back in with one more layer. Hopefully that will help it to look a little bit more cohesive without those white patches, but I really love the color of this and really love the way that it is turning out. So we're gonna add one more coat. Hopefully that'll be it. And I hate it. I just think it looks too splotchy and not what I was going for. That first coat that I put on looked really good, loved the way it was looking, and the more I added, the more I hated it. So for the third time, I am going to re-prime that wall, re-lime wash that wall, and I ordered a couple of different pigments. I ordered 2 more colored pigments so I can kind of see which one looks the best, because I think the color is still looking a little bit too pink and not as like neutral as I was hoping it would. So we're gonna wait for those to come in. It's gonna be like another week before those come in. So I'm gonna move on to finishing the countertops, work on that, prime the wall again, and then we'll come back to re-lime washing the wall for the third time. All right. Well, they say third time's a charm, and that was true here. This time I did some more research and sort of went back to the cloud method, but I learned that you want to make larger clouds, and instead of spreading them out around the wall before connecting them, you want to start the next cloud close to the first one and connect them right away. This gives you that layered, textured look of the Limewash. And the last thing I forgot to mention, the Limewash dries a lot lighter than how it goes on the wall. So don't be alarmed if it's very dark at first. Here's how the wall finally looks, and I am so happy with it. Now we need to create the breakfast bar. We have never had an eat-in kitchen or really anywhere to eat in this house. So I thought, why don't we add a little bar top and some stools so that at least we have somewhere to sit and eat in the kitchen other than going into the living room, which is what we usually do. I don't have a dining room in here either. So I think this is a great solution. So now we just need to figure out, this is an Allen & Roth butcher block countertop. Yes, it's a little bit wet right there. It's drying out, but it's unfinished. So I thought I could stain it if I want to do that. We can figure out a color there. I was gonna make it a little bit narrower, but I actually think I like the width of it, but I do need to make it shorter so that there's room to open the cabinet over here. A little sneak peek, don't look at that, it's coming up. And then I don't want it to be all the way to the end there so that you aren't hitting into it coming in the doorway from the hall. I want to make the butcher block 5 feet instead of the 6 feet it came in, but this thing is incredibly heavy and there is no way I can hold it up while pushing it through my table saw. So instead I put the butcher block on top of my sawhorses to use the circular saw. In order to get a straight cut, I set up a rail to cut against. Now, you want to make sure to account for the width of the saw guide before clamping your rail down to the wood. I put my saw blade up against my line where I need to cut it and then clamp the cutting rail down up against it. You can use anything straight as a cutting rail, a 2x4 would work just as well. Before I take the block back inside, I sanded it down with both a 120 and a 220 grit sandpaper so it's nice and smooth, and made sure to get the cut edge really well. Now, to hold the butcher block up, I found these heavy-duty brackets. I didn't want legs or cabinets or anything that would take up more space in my kitchen. I also want the butcher block to be higher than a typical counter height. My stools are 29 inches, so the bottom of my block is going to be at 41 inches from the ground. I found this reference guide on Pinterest that helped me figure out where I should put it. Then I marked a general area of where the brackets would go. I have 3 of them, one for each end and then one for the middle. Even though these brackets are heavy duty and will hold over 100 pounds, I didn't trust the little screws and anchor they came with. So instead I got these toggleable anchors as well. These are ideal when you want to make sure your piece isn't going anywhere. However, you do need to put a pretty big hole in the wall to use them. For this 3/16 inch size, I had to use a 1/2 inch drill bit. I put 2 toggle bolts on the top holes of each bracket and then used the screws the bracket came with for the bottom 2. And this thing isn't going anywhere. Once I got all the brackets on the wall, Mason helped me lift the butcher block on top of them, but we quickly realized it was too wide. Not just for the size brackets that we had, but for the space as well. So I took it back out to the garage and ripped the block down lengthwise. This time I used a 2x4 as my cutting rail since that was all I could find that was long enough. This width is so much better, but before I attach it to the brackets, I want to stain the wood. I did a few test stain pieces on the same wood so that we could see, this is just a scrap piece that I had cut off, so we could see what was going to work the best. I really thought I was going to go with dark walnut or early American. This is actually early American with special walnut on top of it, and then this is special walnut, this is special walnut with early American on top of it. Driftwood, way too light, don't like that one at all. English chestnut, a little bit too brown toned. I'm trying to match the island. So this is the color of the island that I already had. So I'm trying to get as close to that as I can, which has a little bit more of a reddish tone to it. So I actually think that the special walnut, once it has, it looks a little off on camera, but once it has the like sealer top coat on, I think that's gonna be the closest one. You know, on camera, it really looks like the special walnut with early American is gonna be the best one, but it's actually a lot darker in person in comparison. So I really think special walnut's the way to go. That's what I'm gonna go with. And then we're gonna be putting a polyacrylic on top, so it really should match nicely. At least that's the hope. We can always go back and add the Early American on top if we choose to. I'm so glad I went with Special Walnut. I added 3 coats and let it dry fully. It doesn't exactly match my island, but I think it's pretty close. So I let the stain dry for 24 hours and then added 3 coats of polyacrylic. I like to add poly with a natural bristle brush. I just like the finish that it gives, and I always lightly sand in between coats. I got these stoles from Walmart. They were very inexpensive, and I don't want to leave them in the natural wood tone they're currently in. But I'm also not entirely sure what I want to do with them. So if you have any suggestions, leave them in the comments. Should I paint them or leave them, and what color would you choose? Well, here's a look at where we are so far. I just love the subtle dimension the Limewash adds to the walls, especially if you don't want to commit to a full solid colored paint. But next week I'm sharing how I painted my cabinets along with a German schmear backsplash. It looks so good, you guys, so stay tuned for that. But for more renovations right now, check out this playlist and I'll see you next week.